So next up is Bernardo BOATENG, and he is telling us all about actual versus budget dashboards with dynamic arrays in Excel. Bernard is a Microsoft Excel MVP, a Microsoft certified trainer, a financial modeler and data analyst with over 10 years work experience in banking, insurance and business development. Bernard is a certified Microsoft Excel expert, skilled in business analytics, dashboards, and building financial models for budgeting, business valuation, scenario planning, and investments. He's the founder of Finex Skills Hub and a co-founder of Business Evolution Systems and Training Limited, and that's an approved training provider of the Financial Modelling Institute of Canada. The firm has successfully trained over 30 advanced financial modelers in Ghana. He runs the Finex Project, a pro bono student training outreach program for undergraduate students in Microsoft Excel, Office tools, and financial modelling. And he's here with us today, so if you have any questions, please do raise them in the Q&A.
Hello, good people, and welcome to Excel Virtually Global. My name is Bernard BOATENG. I'm lead trainer at Finex Skills Hub here in Accra, Ghana. And I'm excited to be part of this year's edition. It was my third time. 2 years ago, we created an actual versus budget dashboard with pivot tables and cube functions. So it allowed us to create slices and also pull our numbers in an interactive way using cube functions and pivot tables. Well, 2 years is a long time, and a lot has happened to Excel within this period. So dynamic arrays, Python, Let, Lambda, and all that. We want to challenge ourselves in this edition to build an upgraded version, if you like, of the same dashboard. This time around, we are going to use dynamic arrays and cube functions. Powerful combination. So if you are game, there's a lot to learn. Join me and let's start the process. Okay, so let's have a quick walkthrough of our final work. So this is an actual and budget dashboard. With this, you are able to switch and compare your actual and budget numbers. So with this slicer, when I click on it, this particular array switches from actual and budget. I'm able to also see the performance of all the departments here. Okay, so this is possible using dynamic arrays and cube functions, right? Now, the unique thing here is that we've used the dynamic arrays to restrict the numbers to just what the department spent on. So we realize that it's responsive, and we're also able to compare our actual and budget trend over the period. Okay, so let's walk through the process we are going to use to create this dashboard. We'll begin with two data sets, actual and budget, convert them into tables, and then create one reference query where we use Power Query to shape, transform this data, create all our dimension tables and fact tables from here. Then we'll proceed and go to Power Pivot in Excel, where we work on our data model. So here we'll connect the dimension and fact tables together, create our DAX calculations, and then from what we get in the data model, we'll now build our dashboard using cube functions and a set of dynamic array functions. Right, so we'll now create this responsive interactive dashboard which updates if there are any changes in the source data. So this is an overview from Power Query, Power Pivot, cube functions, dynamic array functions, our dashboard. So if you are game, let's start the process. Okay, so let's begin with our two tables. The first one is actual. It has data on account codes, account name, department, the date of the transaction, and the amount. This is a table, and we've named it actual. Same headers for the budget. We have account codes, account name, department, dates, and amount. Now, we can load these two tables one by one into the Power Query editor, or we can decide to load it together. Now, to make it possible, we go to data. In the get and transform data group, we'll get the data by launching the Power Query editor. The shortcut for this is Alt F12. Okay, so either way, you land in this blank space. Now, the reason we are here is to generate a blank query. So I'll go to New Source, Other Source, and then generate this blank query, which now allows us to enter a generic M code or formula to bring out two tables. So this is going to be excel.currentworkbook, open close bracket. Now this will scan and pick all named ranges and tables. So because we have our two tables, it brings actual and budget. Now thankfully, these tables have the same columns, so we could just expand using this icon. Okay, take off use original column name as prefix, and then we click OK. Now you realize that we have the same columns, but now our tables have been appended, sort of put together. We can select all and then go to transform and then detect the data type for each. Sometimes it gets it right, it gets it wrong sometimes. So this is 1, 2, 3 whole number. This is text. This is text. Now for dates, we have two formats, but we want to maintain one format for actual and budget. So I'm going to format this as a proper date. I'll use this to replace that current step. Okay, so when I move on, I have my amount, which is properly labeled. And then this is the column that has actual or budget, right? So if I drop this down and I load more, you realize that in this column, I have actual or budget. We're going to name this column our scenario column. So I'll come here, double click, and then name this scenario. What we have is a table that has every information we need to create our dimension tables and our fact tables. So we are going to name this reference, okay, and then use that to, if you like, give birth to all the fact tables and dimension tables we need. First, we need to get our actual table. So I'm going to right click this and then choose reference. Okay, so this reference, I'm going to name this actual, right? So to get the actual table, I need to come to the scenario column and filter out only actuals, right? So I'll come here and then we'll check budget and then click OK. So this gives me my actual table. We are going to repeat the same process to get our budget. So I'll come right click and then reference this, come over here, and then I'll name this budget. Now I'll go to the right, come here, and then load more, and then uncheck my actual, right? So we now have our two fact tables. Now, if you look at our complete work, beyond our fact tables, we will be slicing with scenario, department, okay? So we need to draw these as separate dimension tables. We'll also be breaking down our numbers by the account type, okay? And then we also have our date here. So based on this, we need to now create 4 dimension tables, one on scenarios, the other one on departments, another set on accounts, and then we have our calendar table, right? So let's get back here and then proceed to draw our dimension table. So I'll right click this and then I'll reference. So now when I reference, I'm going to pull my account details from here. So let me call this accounts. So I'll call this accounts. The columns I need are account code and account name, right? These are the details of my chart of accounts. I'll right click this and remove other columns. So I'm left with only these. Right click and then remove duplicates, right? For dimension tables, we require the primary column to be unique, no duplicates here. So that is my accounts table. Now I'll go back and then reference this one, a reference table. And then here, I'm going to generate my department. Okay, so same process. I'll highlight this, remove all the other columns, right click, and then remove duplicates from here. This now leaves me with a unique department list, which I'm going to create a slicer from. Okay, then I'm going to reference the same process again, and then I'll do for scenarios. So the scenario that I have can be either budget or actual. This is the last column here. I'll select, right click, remove other columns, and then remove duplicates. Right. So this now completes my 3 dimension tables, 2 fact tables. The next thing we need to do is to create our calendar table. The calendar table will have our year, our month, and our month values, so we can use it in our dashboard. So we are going to create this calendar table to make it dynamic, taking the earliest date all the way to the latest transaction date. So we are going to right click and then generate this calendar table from a blank query. Okay, so in this blank query, we are going to use a custom M code, very simple one. So we need a start date, and to do that, we have to use the number.from function. So number.from, I open my bracket, take off this closing bracket. Now I'm looking for the minimum date, so list.min. Now list.min will scan a particular column for the lowest date or the earliest date. Now because everything is housed in our reference table, I'll reference the reference table if you like, okay, and then bring in my square brackets. Now in the reference table, there's a column called date, okay, which has all the dates. I'll close the square brackets, close list.min, close number.from. So what this is basically doing is that it is stamping the earliest dates, okay. We are generating a sequence or a series of dates. So from this least date or minimum date, we bring 2 dots, okay, which adds +1 from that point, and all the way to. So instead of list.min here, I'm going to be using list.max. Okay, same reference dates. Okay, so this way is dynamic. When you add on new transactions, you still have your calendar table updated. Now we want a list, so I'll come and stand right after the equal sign, bring a curly bracket, and then close the whole formula with another closing curly bracket. Okay, so if I have this and I press enter, I get an initial list. Okay, now if you are competent with Excel dates, Power BI dates, these are generic values that represent dates. I'm going to convert this to a table. So I'll convert this into a table. Nothing to do here. I'll just click OK. Right. Now, this is a query that's going to be named calendar. So it's a calendar table. In this original column, we have some generic dates here. I'm going to convert it into a proper date. Now, you notice that it starts from the 1st of January, which is when we started budgeting, adds all the way, one day, all the way to the end. And it's dynamic. Let me name this date as well. So this now becomes our primary column. From here, I can switch to add column, use this date button to now draw all my date attributes. So I have year, okay, from here, then I have my month. This is going to give me the month values, useful for sorting. And then I'll take the month name itself. So I'll come here and I'll do name of month. Right. So you notice that when we use this in our dashboard, we truncated it, we extracted only the first 3 letters. Okay, so to avoid creating a new column, I'll just come to transform and then under extract, okay, extract the first 3 characters here, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so this now gives us our completed calendar table. So we have set out 2 fact tables, actual and budget, then our 4-dimension table, accounts, departments, scenario, and calendar. Of course, this is going to be a helper query, so we are not going to be loading this in the data model. So please take note. So once we are done, we'll come and then we load 2. Right? So very important, so that we have the option to choose how do we load it. So once this dialog box pops up, instead of the generic table, we'll choose only create connection, and then we'll add to the data model. Now initially all of them will go to the data model, so I'll click OK. Once it finishes loading, we'll disconnect that reference so that we carry on with the rest. Okay, so we'll right click this and then we'll load 2 and then take off the data model part from here. We ignore this warning and then proceed. Right. Usually when you are using Excel or current workbook, you need to take note that if you dump these tables or these queries as tables in your worksheet or workbook, you need to filter it out so that you don't have a situation where it scans and adds the table again. In this case, we are not adding these as tables, so we'll just proceed with the queries in the data model. So at this point, where can we find our data model? We have Power Pivot activated already, right? So when we go to manage, we should now have all our tables, 6 of them, right? The default view is the data view. So to connect our tables, we'll switch to the diagram view, right? So this is basically a star schema. Our 2 fact tables are here, actual and budget. They can be at the hat or at the bottom of our page. And then we'll now surround this with our dimension tables. So I have my departments here, bring in my scenarios. I now have all these in place. So now to the connections. This is connecting to accounts using account code. Okay, so this is my primary key, that is my foreign key. Okay, same way with department, I'll connect it this way. and then I have my scenario here, connecting in that way, and then my calendar is going to connect to my date, right? So that's that. So that completes the connections for the actual. Now we do same for the budget. So with these connections done, it is important that you hide the duplicate fields in the fact table, right? So that your user would clearly know which one has to be used as a slicer or to break down your values. So best practice, I'll highlight all these apart from the amount that I'm going to use. So this, I'll come here, account name, department, date, and then scenario. Right click and then hide all these from client tools. So this way, when I switch to my data view, okay, I get to only work with the amounts in the fact table. Right. Now while we are here, you realize that in the account codes, in the account table, okay, there's a reason we put these account codes here so that it can sort it properly. So the revenue lines will be on top and then the cost lines will come down. So I've now selected account name. I'll come to sort by column and then sort this by account code. And then I'll click OK. So this way, anytime we pull the account names, it comes already sorted. Then let's do same for our calendar. So for our calendar, anytime we pull our months, the default behavior is to sort it alphabetically, but we can override this by sorting by the month values, starting from January to December. So I'll choose this one and then I'll click OK. So that is it for our data modeling in Power Pivot. Now we are set to start our calculations. So I'll just close this and then come back to our native Excel. Let me just take off this and then insert a new column for our calculations. I'll name this calculations. Okay, so for our calculations, we'll go through this in just 5 sections, right? So I'll just organize the column width. So this will be set to 5. We'll make column B our main calculation. Okay, so we start off with measures. The key measures we need here are the actual, budget, balance, right? These numbers run through everything that we've done here. So we are going to create them in Power Pivot. So we'll come to measures, new measure. Okay, this is the dialog box. Now it helps if you can create a dedicated table to organize all our measures. It's particularly useful when you have a lot of measures. Okay, so in Excel, one quick way you can do that is to do it in Power Pivot. So I'll copy this empty cell. Okay, go to manage, and then when this opens up, my clipboard will be active, right? So I'm basically pasting an empty cell to generate an empty table. So this I'm going to call my measures. Okay, and then I'll click OK. So with this blank table, it usually comes with an idle column. So I'm going to right click and then hide that idle column from client tools. Now when I go back to my dialog box, this should now pop up as an available table. So I'll come here, go to my measures, new measure, and then now in the list of tables, you should now have an area, a table to assign all your measures. So the first calculation we are going to do is actual, right? A very simple DAX formula here. So we are going to sum all the amounts in the actual table. So that's all we are going to do here. And we set this to 2 decimal places using a 1000 separator. Check to be sure everything is fine. And then we repeat the same thing for our budget. So this now becomes our default measures table. So I have my budget here, and then sum the budget amount, and then I'll close my bracket, number 1000 separator 2 decimal place, and I'll click OK. Okay, so we have 2 measures so far. We are left with the third one, which is the balance, right? So new measure, and then I'll come in here and create my balance, which is just a subtraction of my budget and my actual. Okay, so set it to the same number format, 2 decimal place, 1000 separator. Everything is fine here, and I click OK. So these have been created in memory. Now we need to find a way to bring them into our cells. We'll do this with pivot tables, but today we want to use Cubefunctions directly with dynamic arrays, right? So this is how we are going to do it. So let me just put in the labels actual, budget, and balance, right? And then bring these values here. So we are going to use cube value. Okay, so cube value goes into our data model. So I bring a double quote to call the data model, right? And then bring a comma, double quotes, and I have all my tables, okay, and my measures. So my measures are here. I have 3 measures, so I'm calling the actual, close my double quotes, and then close my final bracket. I can now repeat the same process. So I'll just copy this down, change the measure to budget. So I have my budget, Control D, change this to balance, and I have my balance, right? So you notice that this is now the total values. We haven't sliced, we haven't broken it down yet, right? Now the next thing we're going to do is to introduce slices. So if you look at our final work, our slices are scenario and department. So we're going to insert them and then also find a way to capture the outputs from our slices. So first I'll go to insert, right? And then I'll insert a slicer. I'm able to do it this way because in our data model, we have all our tables in there. So I'll switch to data model, click open, and then over here, I now have all my tables. Okay, so scrolling down, I have my department here, and then I'll go down and then pick my scenario, and then I'll click OK. Okay, now I've already formatted my slicer, so it comes like this. This is my default style for the theme we are going to use. So I have my scenario and I have my department. Okay, now for our slices, it will be helpful if we can get what we have selected. Okay, so I'm going to label this department, and here we are going to use one of the cube formulas called cube rank member. Okay, again, we go into our data model. Now the set expression is the slicer name. Every slicer has a name. So if I do SL, I see the slicer department here, and then I'll bring a comma. The next requirement is the rank. So the rank is the position. So I'll put in 1 to represent the first item I select from my slicer, right? Then I'll close my bracket. So I get all. If nothing is selected, I get all. But if I select a particular department, okay, it gives me an input I can use in my calculations. Now let's go on and then do scenario. So here, repeat the same cube, and then instead of the department, we are going to do scenario, and then we have this here. So when we test this, we now have actual, and then we now have corporate selected, right? Let's name this so that it's easier for us to use. So let's make this department selected, and then also make this scenario selected. Okay, now one cool way to name it is I can highlight the whole of this, go to formulas, and then create the names from a selection. Okay, so I'm doing it from the left column. I'll click OK. So what this means is that if I now reference department selected, this is the cell I'm looking for. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's update our cube values in these slicers. We want these numbers to respond to the slicer, the department slicer. So I'll just insert the slicer department inside the formula. Okay, so we realize that it updates. The same thing here, comma, slicer department. I'll close this, and then finally I'll do this for balance as well. But we didn't use the actual and budget because we don't want these to change. We have special tiles or cards for them, right? So we're only using the department slicers for this. Okay, so we now have these, our slicers. Now let's go on to our cube sets. So cube sets store values, right? So that we can use them to create our arrays. So we'll go to the dynamic arrays very soon. So we'll create our cube sets. Now with our cube sets, we need two. One that will give us a list of all the accounts, okay, and then we'll also create the cube set that has our month names, right? So to do that, we are going to use the cube set function. So let's name this items in accounts, right? So for items in accounts, we use the cube set, right? Call our data model, and then the expression we are going to use. So once we call our data model, the expression we are going to use is to go into the accounts table, look for account names, okay, and then bring all the children, all the accounts in there, right? So that is how you express it. Okay, then my caption, I can give it any name for now. So here, let's call this items in count. Okay. Then there are optional arguments, the sort order. Well, we don't really have to provide that because we already used the Power Pivot option to sort our accounts. Okay, so I'll close this, and then I have items in account. So this is holding some values or list of items, right? To know the number of items in there, let's count those items. So we can name this count of accounts. So the count of accounts is going to be CubeSets count. Okay, and then we just reference the set. So all things being equal, we should have 16. So it just tells us we have 16 account labels in here. Right. Now we're going to use the same method. So let's call items in months. Okay, so the same CubeSets. Go over again for those who missed the first one. So CubeSets, this workbook data model. Okay, so you just basically you're looking for the table that contains the column you want to pull as a set. So in this case, it's calendar. When I go into the calendar table, I'm looking for month name. So in the month name, I'm bringing all the children in the month name. Okay, and I'll bring a comma and move on to the caption, which I can call month. Okay, for the order again, we sorted that out in the Power Pivot, so I'll just close this. This is now holding our 12 months. We want to be sure, let's count months. So we use the CubeSet count, go in here, and then we should have our 12 months, right? So as we did, let's now name these. Usually it's helpful so that you don't have to really come up again when you have to use them in your formulas. So I'll name them from the left labels. Okay, so what it means is that we now have item in accounts here, and then the rest like that. So now that we have this, let's now proceed and do the staging for our dashboard. So staging for actual and budget. So what we want to achieve here is that we should now have a scale of all the account labels right here, right? So based on these two values, we are now going to use a dynamic array function to get this done. So here we are going to use the CubeRank member. Okay, we'll bring in our data model. Now the sets expression is the items in accounts. Okay, and then the rank is all the 16 that we have here. So we are going to use sequence. So sequence is now going to take the count of accounts, which we've already calculated up there. We close our brackets, and then we close our final bracket. So if we got this right, then it should come with the revenue on top and the expense below. Right, so we have our spelled array. Okay. But the good thing about this is that it's still pointing to your data source, so any changes will still go through the process. Okay. Now let's now bring this part of our dashboard. So we now want to pull the total amount, okay, for actual and the total amount for budget. Right. So we're going to use another dynamic array, which is by row. Now we could have generated cube value. So cube value will pull the total values against each label here, right? But we don't want to do it and copy it down. So we are going to introduce by row. So by row now allows us to do all this in the cell. It requires an array. So I'll select this. Okay, bring a hash to reference this entire spell or array. And then I'll proceed and then introduce my lambda, right? So with lambda, it helps us create a variable which we can put back into the formula to help us create that single formula that can go down. I can name it with any value. So here I'm using x, right? So now the x here is going to be used in my calculation. The calculation I'm going to use here is cube value. Okay, so we used this earlier. We go into the data model. Okay, so in this case, we are looking for measures, actual. Okay, and then what label are you using to fetch the actual? Well, the labels on my left, which I've named x, right? So all these are going to come in here. So I'll close this, close my lambda, and close my by row, right? Now when I do that, again, I get another spell. So this is the spell for my actual. So I'll just repeat the same process again to help you catch it. So it's by row. Okay, we take this as our array, and then we introduce our lambda. We name this x, and then we introduce our cube value. So this is the workbook data model, and then we bring in our measures. So our measures here, this time around, we are looking for budget. And then the labels we are looking for is x. It is each label in the array I've selected. So I'll close this, close lambda, and then that, and then I have my budget. Right. So we've done 3 so far. Now the next thing we're going to do is to spell our months, right? So that was another cube set that we calculated here. So let's just position it here. So we'll use our cube rank member. So cube rank member will now bring all the items in our set. Now the set we are looking for is the items in months. Okay. The rank is sequence. How many do we have in there? So we use the count of the months. Okay, and then we'll close our brackets, and then we'll close our final bracket for cube rank member. Right. So with this, it spells it downwards, but I want this across. So your guess is as good as mine. We are going to use transpose to now reorient this so that this goes to the right. Right. So we now have this here. Now, if it helps, I can align this. So with dynamic arrays, you just have to move the first cell, and all of them will just come along. Now, to our main formula. So we just want to create an array that breaks down actual or budget by month. That is essentially our goal, right? So we want to use the make array function. So with make array, once you give it the number of rows and columns in your array, it will use the calculation. It will use the calculation and then create your array based on those parameters. So we'll start with make array. Okay, now the number of rows we need here are the number of items we have in our account. Okay, so we have our count of accounts as rows. Okay, and then for the columns, we have the 12 months. So we use the count of months. Okay, so if you like, this is 16 by 12, right? So now that I've declared this, I'll now come and then introduce my lambda. So lambda helps me create these variables or parameters. The row I'm going to call R, and then the column I'm going to call C, right? So this is how we are going to do it. So once we have this, we can now step down and then create our cube value. Okay, so this is our cube value. So our cube value will take this workbook data model. Okay, then for our first expression, we are basically repeating the cube rank that we did on the left. Okay, so our cube rank member is here. We'll take this workbook data model. Okay, our set expression are the items in our count. Okay, and then for the rank, how many rows do we need here? Okay, so we said give us the R. Okay, so this is going to give us the R that we put in there. So that completes our first set. And then we'll proceed and then do the same thing for the column side. So cube rank member, this workbook data model. Okay, the items in months. Okay, and then how many do you need? I need the value that I put in C. Okay, so we have 2 expressions so far. I'm left with the third expression, which is the measure itself. So I'll now come and then introduce the measure. So this measure is going to be actual. We want to stage this for actual, and then later we just copy it and do same for budget. Okay, so I'll now close my brackets for the cube value, close it for lambda, and then finally for make array. So what this basically is doing is that based on the variables for the number of rows and columns, okay, we are using the lambda variables R and C to create this spell or dynamic array that will break our actual by month. So let's see if we got this right. So this is our value. So these are our values. So I'll come here, Alt HOI to fit this. Okay, so you realize that if I had to sum all this, right, I'm going to get the actual value that I have over here. So this is for actual. Now it's pretty easy to do it for budget. So now that we've staged for actual, let's copy these 2. Okay, and then paste it here. Right, so that's the good thing about dynamic arrays. You just deal with cells, not ranges, right? So I have this here. This will stay the same, and then for our make array function, rows and columns remain the same, but here we want to stage this for budget. So we'll come and then we stage this for budget. So this now gives us our budget. Now the reason we are doing this is that at the end of the day, we want to be able to switch and see our actual and budget views. Okay, so the stage that we did for actual will bring the actual values, and then when we click our budgets, these numbers will switch to budget, right? So that is why we created these 2. Right, now next up, we're almost done with our calculations. We want to now proceed and then create a situation where if I select a particular department, okay, the values that I have here can be filtered. So that is our next calculation. So basically what we want to achieve here is if a particular department is selected, right, we don't want any leftover calculations. We just want the array or dynamic array to give us the numbers for the particular department, right? If I clear this filter, I come back. If I select any other, okay, so that is what we are trying to achieve here. But currently, you realize that first, the department slicer is not slicing our calculation. So let me just bring this down here and then we'll go through this together. So I have my department here. Now, this has to be part of our cube set in here. Okay, so if you realize our cube set is basically controlling all the calculations that we have here. So in our original cube set, we just went into the account table, picked our account name, and then all the children in there. But we want a situation where if I select a particular department from this slicer, we want only the numbers for the department that I have selected. Okay, so we'll make a little adjustment in our formula. So basically, we want to add the department selected into this formula, right? So I'll do that. I'll begin with a open bracket, okay, calling the department, that is the table, go to the department column, that is what I've just selected. Okay, now what we want is that if something is selected from the slicer, so departments selected, so I'm going to join this with a slicer selection, okay, and then close this, join that, and then close my final bracket here, and then bring my comma. Okay, so what I'm saying is that at this point, if anything is selected from the department, okay, we want that department to control what numbers we see. Okay, so that is why I'm introducing this part. I'll close the final bracket here. So remember, this is linked to the slicer that we have. So we press enter. Now we have this. So if you notice, corporates do not have any sales accounts. Corporate doesn't have any sales accounts, discounts, and all that, right? If I click sales and marketing, they have everything. So everything here comes, right? If I clear, I have the full list. Okay, so this department slicer can now control the values that we see. Okay, so this is fine, but we really don't want to see the labels if they are not showing any numbers. Okay, so we want to go the next level and say that, well, if the people did not spend or they did not budget, okay, then I don't want to see the lines, so that we can have this clean spell. Okay, so I just want to see just those numbers. So again, let's add another filter. So the filter here basically is going to say that if there's the number I'm seeing or the number that has been calculated is greater than 0, then bring it, otherwise don't show it. So let's go back here and then introduce a filter function, right? So this filter function is not your regular dynamic array filter function, but this is all the Cubefunction sets. Okay, so this is filter from MDX. So it works just like a regular filter. So we are taking the whole of this set, okay, and then what we are saying here is that only bring the measures, okay. So for example, let's use accounts, let's use actual, okay, where actual is greater than 0. Okay, so that is how we are going to be doing this, right? But we want to make this dynamic, so if the person selects actual or budget, we can get the numbers filtered accordingly. So here, instead of using this one, I'm going to link this with the scenario selected. Okay, so I'll just link this with the scenario selected. Okay, and then just join this with that. So at this point, if I now click enter, what's going to happen is that if they didn't spend or they didn't budget, okay, we are not going to be seeing those lines. Okay, so when I clear, see, I see sales. If I select one account, then only the labels that apply come here. So it's a very neat way to make sure that the final dashboard is clean. Okay, you don't have any idle rows in there. So I think that is the main part of our calculation. So now that we have our department slicing all our calculations, we can now proceed and then create the last calculation. Just make sure that you leave enough rows for the dynamic spell. So this is going to be the staging for our line chart. So here, this is what we are trying to create at the moment. So to create that, we need to bring in our labels for the month. So this is what we have here. But if you look at the chart, we only use the first characters in here, right? So let me just come in and then create the left function. So the left function brings the first value if you don't put in any characters. So I will just highlight the whole of the array, putting in the hash, close this, and then I have my JF to December, right? So basically what I'm looking for is the total actual per month and the total budget per month. Okay, so if I have this, we are going to use another dynamic array function called byCall. So byCall, okay, again, what this is helping us do is that instead of calculating the sum for one of the columns and then dragging it, we can now connect it to byCall, and then it will create the dynamic array spell for us. Okay, so we begin by selecting the array. So the array is here. Okay, and then I'll bring in a hash. So this highlights the whole of the numbers that you see over there. Then I'll come in here, introduce my lambda. So now the lambda requires a variable parameter. I'm going to name this x as we always do. And then here I'm summing each x. Okay, so each x now represents the values in a month. So I'll close this, close for lambda, and then close for byCall. Right. So if I press enter, then I get a spell from January to December. Let me just zoom out a bit so you can see all this. Right. So this is for actual, and if I want to do same for budget, the spell for actual starts from here, and then the spell for budget starts from here. So this is T29. So all I need to do is just copy the original formula down, okay, and then change this reference to T29. So T29 begins our budget spell. So just like that, we have our calculations. Right. So we have this. Let's bring in our total. So our total is now going to be alt equal to, and then Control D. So these will now represent our total. Now with these total, we are going to create the last chart, which is the donut chart. So this should show us how much the department has spent, the actual over their budget. The actual here is the red ring. Okay, so we'll come and then we'll calculate for our chart. So let's select a department that hasn't really overspent. So I'll look for my slicer and then bring in project. So for project, they are flying in under 20-something%. So for their calculation, I'm going to divide this by that. Okay, so this is 29%. So the part that they are left with is 1 minus. Okay, and then I have this total 100%. But of course, you can have a situation where people overspend. But let's put in our charts and then you see how this looks. So I'll go select this. So we are going to use the donut chart for this. I'll select. So as expected, the 29% is well represented here. Okay, but we'll have a challenge when people overspend. Okay, so when people overspend, let me give you an example. So if I come to sales and marketing, okay, they bring in more money, so naturally they have to spend more. So if they overspend, it's 238%. Now the chart is not really showing us that. So what we want is that if people overspend, let's cap it at 100% so that we have a full ring. Okay, so let's adjust this formula and then we'll come in min. So min bring us 100%. Okay, if the percentage here is more than 100%. So the one here represents that, and then I'll close my bracket. Okay, so this will now give us a full ring if the people overspend. But then we'll lose our label. So we really need to see the 236% that they spent. So I can recalculate this over here. Okay, and then format this, and I'll call this my label. So later I'm going to take this and then use it in my calculation. Okay, so with this done, let's create our last chart. So this is one of two charts that we are going to use. So if you look here, we have this. Now let's create our trend chart. So the trend chart basically compares our actual and budgets over the years. Okay, so we are going to just highlight this and then we insert our chart here. So we are going to use this line chart over here. Okay, I want this to be like a spark line, so I'm going to take off the title. So any other elements that is not needed, I'm going to take it away. Okay, so take off the grid lines and then also take off the legend. So in the end, we have this clean, nice spark line looking chart. Okay, so now let's take these two to our dashboard. We also add our slices as well. So these are the 4 elements that we'll be using in our dashboard. Okay, so if you have the start workbook, we've made the layout for the dashboard available. So you just have to unhide, and then here you have the dashboard layout. So with the usual elements, we have your shapes, okay, which has been filled in with some gradients, all color. So this is our main theme, and then we'll fit in our donut chart here, and then below you have the range formatted to bring in our dynamic array spells, right? So let's bring in the elements one by one. So first, I'm going to take the charts. So Control Select. I'll cut this, come to my dashboard, and then paste this here. The 2 charts. Now let's bring in our slices. So for our slices, we have these 2. Now, let's fill in our labels. So we've calculated for our accounts, actual budget, and then we have this as well. We just do a little calculation over here for our conditional formatting, okay, and then we are good to go. Now we want to calculate the amount spent. So again, I will select this, use the hash to go down, divided by the budget, again hash, and then I have the percentages. Now the rule is this: if it's an expense item from discounts downwards, okay, and we've done more than 66%, we want a red. But if it's a revenue or sales item, it's the reverse, right? So we set the default 3-icon conditional format on this. So I'm just going to reference this value and then scale down, go down. Okay, so you realize that it works, but it is using the same logic for sales. So for this particular one, we need to reverse it. Okay, so to do that, let's change the logic here and say that if the value that you have here, okay, is equal to sales, is equal to sales, then let's do a 1 minus, right? Then if not, we'll bring the original G19 with the hash. Okay, let me just correct this. So this should now reverse the logic for sales while the expense lines are still maintained, right? So we now have that. Now let's bring in our dynamic array spell for the monthly breakdown. Now we want it this way: if the person has selected actual, we want actual. If the person has selected budget, we want budget. So before we begin, we'll want to start with an if and say the scenario selected, okay, if is equal to actual. Apologies, is a bit too small here, but you can read it from the formula bar. Okay, so if it is equal to actual, then let's come to the calculations and then bring our actual staging, right? So otherwise, bring us the budget staging. Okay, so we have this. So let's test this and see. So 16 for actual, 4 for budget, back to 16, like that, right? Let's test our slicer as well. So this, okay, for sales and marketing, right? Now, those initial hash that you see, the initial attempt to bring the numbers from the cube or the data model. Once the numbers come in, you shouldn't have it again, right? It's usually very responsive. Okay, now the challenge we have is that ideally we should select actual or budget, right? But what if both are selected? Then we get into an error. Okay, so we can just wrap an if error to take care of this. That's in the events we have an error because both are selected. Okay, then just give us a blank. Okay, so we can repeat that for the rest of our calculations just to anticipate situations where this happens. Right. Okay, so we are back now. So let's concentrate on formatting our chart. Okay, so we're almost there. Now let's bring in our labels for actual, budget, and balance. I mean, we could leave it like this, but usually it's a bit easier for users to see the truncated version, right? So let's quickly format this, okay, into a million format. So I'll highlight this, press Ctrl+1, okay, come to custom, right? Custom script here is 0.0 for 2 decimal place, 2 commas to knock off the 6 zeros in a million format, and then we add an M subscript, okay, to this, right? So 0.00, comma, comma, double quote, M, double quote, and I click OK. So this should reflect here. And we can now highlight these three and increase the font size. So that completes our dashboard. So we now have our sliders working nicely. We've gone through the ETL in Power Query. We've gone through data modeling in Power Pivot. We did some DAX calculations, and then we used by row, by call, sequence, make array, and all that to achieve this. I hope you enjoyed it and you've learned some key concepts. Thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you in the next edition.
Well, thank you, Bernard, for that presentation. That was very interesting. I'm just going to put the evaluation slide up now. So if you want to put any comments on the form for Bernard, that would be lovely. I'm just going to, there was a question in the chat, which I'm just going to go and have a look at now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Good.
Okay, you're now live. How different is the filter function you use from the regular dynamic array function filter? That was just towards the end of your video that they came up with that question.
Okay, so that's a good question. I think I mentioned it earlier, that filter function is part of a set of functions we call MDX functions, multidimensional expressions. So if you use the data model or you create calculations with cube functions, MDX is a set of complementary functions. It actually sits as sets in the pivot table in Excel. So filter is an MDX function. We use it here to help us retrieve all the values that are greater than 0. So there are more MDX functions if you create a data model and you use cube formulas. So that is the difference. This is different from the regular filter dynamic array function, as I explained earlier.
Okay, thank you. I wondered, because I see you spend time teaching as well as in your job, I wondered, when you're trying to teach your students how to create a dashboard, what kind of recommendations do you make for an effective dashboard?
Oh, less is more in a dashboard. I know people are inclined to load the dashboard with everything possible, but you need to make the user focus on what matters. So as much as possible, try to limit the number of charts that you can put in one screen, and you also limit the number of colors. So usually you are not going to be wrong with gray or white, and maybe an extra 2 or 3 colors, right? This way you remove the noise and you make it easy for your user to focus on what matters. I think we use an example in a dashboard that we created. So you realize that the two dominant colors basically was white, gray, and the rose red that you saw there. It makes it easier for your user to focus on what matters. Now you can also use slicers to help your user also drill down and then ask specific questions on the key performance indicators on your dashboard. So these are some of the tips that I normally share with my students when they are creating dashboards.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you, Bernard. We don't seem to have any more questions. It was a great presentation, so thanks for joining us. I'm going to put your evaluation slide back up, so if you've got any comments for Bernard, then please do put them on the form.
Thank you, Sam Product, and see you in the next edition.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. Bye.